In the quiet of the evening, where shadows softly play, a fairy tale wolf sheds his skin, gently drifting away, with a twinkle in his eye and a heart full of dreams. He waits for the Friday night glow, where the magic redeems. Oh, the wolf in the moonlight, he's found his true call, reading tales of wonder for one and for all. In a world of stars dancing, his spirit takes flight, with stories of beauty under the starlit night.
Okay, well, I really do like the songs I have, but they're also 3 to 4 minutes long. So, how you doing, Taka? Congrats on getting first. My captions thinks Taka is taco. No, it was the first time I said it. Of course, Twitch is saying my connection's unstable, so that's nothing new. It is Friday night, which means I'll be reading more fairy tales. Ooh, got work? That's not fun. Of course, I guess I haven't worked for 3 years now. Takomura! Say, if you were female, could we call you Taka Bell? Okay, how did my book get stained? That's not good. And that's my cat. One of them. Let's see. Oh, halfway through this book. Okay. It's none of them are very long, so I'll probably get through maybe 5 or 6 stories tonight. I only have one cat that meows. It feels like I need to put one more sound dampener around my microphone to prevent cat from happening. Yeah, that's my big fluffy boy that's doing all the meowing. It makes me wonder, they always say that stray cats don't meow. No, they do. They really do. Both of the... It's typically the male cats around here that meow, though. It's either male cats or kittens. Unless, of course, my little stripy princess wants attention, then she'll not only meow, but she'll also claw me. But anyway, let's see. 9:05. Probably switch to the library sets. I feel like I need to redo this set again. So I'd hate to get rid of the Grim Desk. Of course, my book is supposed to be glowing, but that doesn't quite translate very well. It's hard to put a glowing effect on something with a transparency. I don't know why. You just have to make the glow transparent, but it has to be solid enough that it shows through. They don't stop meowing? Oh, they probably have to announce their territory a little bit more. Of course, the other day I went out to my car, and one cat was laying underneath it, and the boy was laying on my hood. Do something real fast here. Okay. Okay, that is adjusted. Since you're one of the most consistent people who come to the chats, I just made you VIP. So, congrats on that, and thank you for being somewhat consistent in coming in. I don't really have that many people that are. It's as if reading fairy tales is some strange niche. Oh, God. I think I may start trying to do gaming streams at least one day a week. Of course, I did that Wednesday and I was obsessed with the game and didn't stop streaming until I finished it. So that was about 6.5 hours. Nope, there's that diamond. And it doesn't really come with that many privileges. You can shout people out if you want, I guess. Let's see. Oh, that's not what I wanted. I'm glad of anything I can do to get people to read some more, so. Oh, I already had Fossabot to do one for you. That's interesting. I wonder why Fossabot doesn't do it unless the name's said multiple times. Because I already had an auto shoutout set up for you. That's what Fosabot does. It's supposed to say it as soon as you show up. Yeah, that's enabled. Okay. Hey, you're supposed to go to my auto shoutouts. I wonder why I didn't do it. No. Fosabot, for all that it is, isn't really that good. Nope. Probably. I mean, it's just supposed to recognize when you post. So. I said, I may set it up for one of the other ones. And there goes my timer for my donation links. I'm going to turn that off. So I hate hounding people for donations. Turn off the clip, turn off the donates. Turn off the merch. Turn off the archives. Turn off the subs. Okay, leave the affiliates in the books. Okay. But anyway, ouch. We're still in the Crimson Fairy book. As I said, we're only halfway through it. And I'm almost done with the Rivals of Sherlock Holmes. And since you're the only one in here at the moment, I'll go ahead and tell you what the next book might be. There is a book originally published, I think, in the 1800s that actually describes the future for, I think, 2045. But it's The Mummy. And I think I'm going to go ahead and start Halloween in August, basically. So if I can get through that. Because then I have another version of Dracula to read when we get closer to October. And that will be what my Thursdays are. After I finish Rivals of Sherlock Holmes. And I'm pretty sure no one else on Twitch has read those yet, so I might be a chance that I actually read something first. But I won't hold my breath. But anyway, let's get into our fairy tales, shall we? Unparish Martian. I really need to get back to studying German more. Nothing else, I'll have to translate the stories. But anyway, our first story for this fabulous Friday night of fairy tales.
Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
It may be that kind of story. The Gold-Bearded Man. Once upon a time, there lived a great king who had a wife and one son whom he loved very much. The boy was still young when, one day, the king said to his wife, "I feel that the hour of my death draws near, and I want you to promise that you will never take another husband, but will give up your life to the care of our son." The queen burst into tears at these words and sobbed out that she would never, never marry again, and that her son's welfare should be her first thought as long as she lived. Her promise comforted the troubled heart of the king, and he died a few days after, at peace with himself and the world. Like the Brendan Fraser one? No, not that mummy. As I said, it's a book that was written in the 1800s and somehow is set in 2045. So it'll be an interesting read. No sooner was a breath out of his body that the queen said to herself, "To promise is one thing, to keep is quite another." And hardly was the last spadeful of earth flung over the coffin than she married a noble from the neighboring country, and got him made king instead of the young prince. Her new husband was a cruel and wicked man who treated his stepson very badly, gave him scarcely anything to eat, and only rags to wear, and he would certainly have killed the boy but for fear of the people. Now by the palace grounds there ran a brook, but instead of being a water brook, it was a milk brook, and both rich and poor flocked to it daily, and drew as much milk as they chose. The first thing the new king did when he was seated on the throne was to forbid anyone from going near the brook, on pain of being seized by the watchman, and this was purely spite, for there was plenty of milk for everyone. I'm not sure I'd want to drink milk from a river. For some days no one dared venture near the banks of the stream, but at length some of the watchmen noticed that early in the mornings, just at dawn, a man with a gold beard came down to the brook with a pail, which he filled to the brim with milk, and then he vanished like smoke before they could get near enough to see who he was. So they went and told the king what they had seen. At first the king would not believe their story, but as they persisted it was quite true. He said that he would go and watch the stream that night himself. With the earliest streaks of dawn, the gold-bearded man appeared and filled his pail as before. Then in an instant he had vanished as if the earth had swallowed him up. Awkward done. The king stood staring with eyes and mouth open at the place where the man had disappeared. He had never seen him before, that was certain. But what mattered much more was how to catch him and what should be done with him when he was caught. He would have a cage built as a prison for him, and everyone would talk of it. For in other countries, thieves were put in prison, and as long as it indeed since any king had used a cage. It was all very well to plan, and even stationed watchmen behind every bush. But it was of no use, for the man was never caught. They would creep up to him softly on the grass as he was stooping to fill his pail, and just as they stretched out their hands to seize him, he vanished before their eyes. Time after time this happened till the king grew mad with rage and offered a large reward to anyone who could tell him how to capture his enemy. The first person that came with a scheme was an old soldier who promised the king that if he would only put some bread and bacon and a flask of wine on the bank of the stream, the gold-bearded man would be sure to eat and drink, and then could shake some powder into the wine, which would send him into sleep at once. After that, there was nothing to do but shut him in a cage. This idea pleased the king, and he ordered bread and bacon and a flask of drugged wine to be placed on the bank of the stream, and when the waters then had been redoubled, then, full of hope, he awaited the result. Everything turned out just as the soldier had said. Early next morning, the gold-bearded man came down to the brook, ate, drank, and fell sound asleep, so that the watchers easily bound him and carried him off to the palace. In a moment, the king had him fast in a golden cage, and showed him with ferocious joy to the strangers who were visiting his court. The poor captive, when he awoke from his drunken sleep, tried to talk to them, but no one would listen to him. So he shut himself up altogether, and the people who came to stare took him for a dumb man of the woods. He wept and moaned to himself all day, and would hardly touch food, though, in dread that he should die and escape his tormentors. The king ordered his head cook to send him dishes from the royal table. The gold-bearded man had been in captivity about a month, when the king was forced to make war upon a neighboring country, and left the palace to take command of his army. But before he went, he called his stepson to him and said, "Listen, boy, to what I tell you. While I'm away, I trust the care of my prisoner to you. See that he has plenty to eat and drink, but be careful that he does not escape, or even walk about the room. If I return and find him gone, you will pay for it with a terrible death." The young prince was thankful that his stepfather was going to the war, and secretly hoped he might never come back. Directly he had ridden of the boy, went to the room where the cage was kept, and never left it night and day. He even played his games beside it. One day, when he was shooting a mark with a silver bow, one of his arrows fell into the golden cage. "Please give me my arrow," said the prince, running up to him, but the gold-bearded man answered, "No, I shall not give it to you unless you let me out of my cage." "I may not let you out," replied the boy, "for if I do, my stepfather says that I shall have to die a horrible death when he returns from the war. No arrow can be of use to you, so give it to me." The man handed the arrow through the bars, but when he had done so, he begged harder and harder that the prince would open the door and set him free. Indeed, he prayed so earnestly that the prince's heart was touched, for he was a tender-hearted boy who pitied the sorrows of other people. So he shot back the bolt, and the gold-bearded man stepped out into the world. "I will repay you 1,000-fold for that good deed," said the man, and then he vanished. The prince began to think what he should say to the king when he came back. Then he wondered whether it would be wise to wait for his stepfather's return and run the risk of a dreadful death, which had been promised him. "No," he said to himself, "I was afraid to stay. Perhaps the world would be kinder to me than he was." Unseen, he stole out when twilight fell, and for many days he wandered over mountains and through forests and valleys without knowing where he was going or what he should do. He had only the berries for food, when one morning he saw a wood pigeon sitting on a bough. In an instant he had fitted an arrow in his bow and was taking aim at the bird, thinking what a good meal he could make off of him, when his weapon fell to the ground at the sound of the pigeon's voice. "Do not shoot, I implore you, noble prince. I have 2 sons at home, and they will die of hunger. I am not there to bring them food." The young prince had pity and unstrung his bow. "Oh, prince, I will repay your deed of mercy," said the grateful wood pigeon. "Poor thing, how can you repay me?" said the prince. "You have forgotten," answered the wood pigeon, "the proverb that runs, mountain and mountain can never meet, but one living creature can always come across another." The boy laughed at this speech and went on his way. By and by he reached the edge of a lake, and flying towards some rushes which grew near the shore, he beheld a wild duck. Now, in the days that the king, his father, was alive, and he had everything to eat he could possibly wish for, the prince had always had wild duck for his birthday dinner. So he quickly fitted an arrow in his bow and took a careful aim. Should I do a duck voice? No. Hey, guilty.
"Do not shoot, I pray you, noble prince,"
Cried the wild duck.
"I have 2 little sons at home, and they will die of hunger if I'm not there to feed them food."
And the prince had pity and let his arrow fall and unstrung his bow.
"Oh, prince, I will repay your deed of mercy,"
Exclaimed the grateful wild duck. "You poor thing, how can you repay me?" asked the prince.
"You have forgotten,"
Answered the wild duck.
"the proverb that runs, mountain and mountain can never meet, but one living creature can always come across another."
The boy laughed at the speech and went on his way. He had not wandered far from the shores of the lake when he noticed a stork standing on one leg, and again he raised his bow and prepared to take aim. Said anything.
"Do not shoot, I pray you, noble prince,"
Cried the stork.
"I have 2 little sons at home. They will die of hunger if I am not there to bring them food."
Again, the prince was filled with pity, and this time also he did not shoot.
"Oh, prince, I thank you for your deed of mercy,"
Cried the stork. You poor stork, how can you repay me? Asked the prince.
"You have forgotten,"
Answered the stork.
"the proverb that runs, mountain and mountain can never meet, but one living creature can always come across another."
The boy laughed at hearing these words again, and walked slowly on. He had not gone far when he fell on 2 discharged soldiers. "Where you go, little brother?" asked one. "I'm seeking work." "So are we," replied the soldier. "We can all go together." The boy was glad of company, and they went on, and on, and on through 7 kingdoms without finding anything they were able to do. At length they reached a palace, and there was a king standing on the steps. "You seem to be looking for something," said he. "This is what we want," they all answered. So the king told the soldiers that they might become his coachmen, but he made the boy his companion and gave him rooms near his own. The soldiers were dreadfully angry when they heard this, for of course they did not know the boy was really a prince, and they soon began to lay their heads together to plot his ruin. Then they went to the king. "Your Majesty," he said, "we think it is our duty to tell you that your new companion has boasted to us that if he were only your steward, he would not lose a single grain of corn out of the storehouses. Now, if your Majesty would give orders that a sack of wheat should be mixed in one of barley, and would send the youth and command him to separate the grains from another in 2 hours' time, you would soon see what his talk was worth." The king, who was weak, listened to what these wicked men had told him, and desired the prince to have the contents of the sack piled into 2 heaps by the time that he returned from his council. "If you succeed," he said, "you shall be my steward, but if you fail, I will put you to death on the spot." The unfortunate prince declared that he had never made such any boast as that was recorded, but it was all in vain. The king did not believe him, and turned him into an empty room, and bade his servants carry a huge sack filled with wheat and barley, and scatter them in a heap on the floor. The prince hardly knew where to begin, and indeed, if he had had 1,000 people to help him, and a week or so to do it, he could never have finished the task. So he flung himself on the ground in despair, and covered his face with his hands. While he lay thus, a wood pigeon flew through the window. "Why are you weeping, noble prince?" asked the wood pigeon. "How can I help weeping at the task set by me, the king? For he says if I fail, I shall die a horrible death." Let's get to right. "Oh, there's really nothing to cry about," answered the wood pigeon soothingly. "I am king of the wood pigeons, whose life you spared when you were hungry, and now I will repay my debt, as I promised." So saying, he flew out of the window, leaving the prince with some hope in his heart. In a few minutes he returned, followed by a cloud of wood pigeons so dense that it seemed to fill the room. Their king showed them what they had to do, and they set to work so hard that the grain was sorted into 2 heaps long before the war council was over. When the king came back, he could not believe his eyes, but search as he might through the 2 heaps, he could not find any barley among the wheat, or any wheat among the barley. So he praised the prince for his industry and cleverness, and made him his steward at once. This made the 2 soldiers even more envious, and began to hatch another plot. "Your Majesty," they said to the king one day as he was standing on the steps of the palace, "that fellow has been boasting again that if you could take care of your treasures, not so much as a gold pin would ever be lost. Put this vain fellow to the proof, we pray you, and throw the ring from the princess's finger in the brook, and bid him find it. We shall soon see if his talk is worth." And the foolish king listened to him, and ordered the prince to be brought before him. "My son," he said, "I have heard that you have declared that if I made you keeper of my treasures, you would never lose so much as a gold pin. Now, in order to prove the truth of your words, I am going to throw the ring from the princess's finger into the brook, and if you do not find it before I come back from council, you will die a horrible death." It was no use denying that he had said anything of the kind. The king did not believe him. In fact, he paid no attention at all, and hurried off, leaving the poor boy speechless, with despair in the corner. However, he soon remembered that it was very unlikely that he should find the ring in the brook. It was impossible that he should find it by staying inside the palace. For some time the prince wandered up and down, peering to the bottom of the stream, and though the water was very clear, nothing could he see the ring. At length he gave it up in despair, and throwing himself down at the feet of a tree, he wept bitterly. "What's the matter, prince?" said a voice just above him. Raising his head, he saw the wild duck. "The king of this country declares I must die a horrible death if I cannot find the princess's ring, which was thrown into the brook," answered the prince. "Now, you must not vex yourself about that, for I can help you," replied the bird. "I am the king of the wild ducks, whose life you spared, and now it is my turn to serve yours." Then he flew away, and in a few minutes a great flock of wild ducks were swimming up and down the stream looking with all their might, and long before the king came back from his council, there it was, safe on the grass beside the prince. At this sight, the king was yet more astonished at the cleverness of his steward, and once promoted him to the keeper of his jewels. Now, you would have thought by this time the king would have been satisfied with the prince and would have left him alone. But people's natures are very hard to change, and when the 2 envious soldiers came to him with a new falsehood, he was ready to listen to them as before. "Gracious Majesty," they said, "the youth whom you have made the keeper of your jewels has declared to us that a child shall be born in the palace this night, which will be able to speak every language in the world and to play every instrument of music. Does he then become a prophet or a magician, that he should know things which have not yet come to pass?" At these words, the king became more angry than ever. He had tried to learn magic himself, but somehow or other his spells would never work, and he was furious to hear that the prince claimed a power that he did not possess. Stammering with rage, he ordered the youth to be brought before him, and vowed that unless this miracle was accomplished, he would have the prince dragged by a horse's tail until he was dead. In spite of what the soldiers had said, the boy knew no more magic than the king did, and this task seemed more hopeless than before. He lay weeping in the chamber which he was forbidden to leave, and suddenly heard a sharp tapping on the window, and looking up, he beheld a stork. "What makes you so sad, prince?" he asked. "Someone has told the king I have prophesied that a child should be born this night in this palace, and speak all the languages in the world, and can play every musical instrument. I am no magician to bring these things to pass. Besides, if that does not happen, you will have me dragged through the city on a horse's tail till I die." It says I'm still connected. Hello, hello, hello. Is anybody in there? What's the say? You go to see. I'm still online because it's posting my chat. There's a Scrafty in chat. Anyone? That is weird. OBS says I'm still on. Well, that sucks, Monkey Dick. Okay, technical difficulty window. I don't know what could be going on. That is just odd. For those of you possibly watching this later on, OBS says that it's still streaming, says that it's still recording, but nothing is going through to Twitch except my chat messages. And you are listening. Da, 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 da. Uncomfortably not. I'll become comfortable. It says I'm live. not stopping recording. I'm just stopping the stream for now. And I find it kinda funny, I find it kinda sad. The streams that I were trying. Am I back on? Oh, now it says I have excellent connection. Lovely. Well, that was a pain in the ass. Thank you. Of course, now it's going to go to freaking ads. I guess I'll try to start the story where I cut off. But at least Switch says I have excellent connection this time. I'll have to do a lot of video editing tonight. Yeah, definitely doing that. So it still has the pre-roll timer going from last time, but it hasn't started the new one. I could have at least waited until I finished one story. This is my gaming screen, by the way. Because I figure if I have a game crash, this would be an appropriate thing for it to switch to. And now we're in ads. The only time I have something break down on stream, I switch to this window. Just makes sense. So, if you're here and you can get past the ads, what do you think of the story so far? I mean, it's a wicked stepfather this time, but everything else in the story I can say that I've read in other stories before. Of course, I don't know what the thing is with queens betraying their dying wish of their husband. That's just sad. Corner right. Nope. Much better. Guess I can just wait out here. I really need to clean this room up. But it is what it is. This is pretty much what my camera sees, though. Okay. Back from ads. So, what was the last thing you heard in the story? I don't know why it always has my eyes rolled back. And the fact that I'm sitting lower than my camera. You're not the right person to ask. Guilty, are you still lurking around? Or are you in transit to work? See, this is one of the reasons I need to have, like, live mods. Someone to keep track of what the hell I'm doing. Okay. Had the stork showed up in the window yet? That's about where I put my bookmark. Okay, so he pecked at the window and asked if he was upset about it. Okay. Get back up to the library set. Okay. I will start back at the packing, just to make sure. In spite of what the soldiers had said, the boy knew no more magic than the king did, and his task seemed more hopeless than before. He lay weeping in the chamber which he was forbidden to leave, when suddenly he heard a sharp tapping on the window, and looking up, he beheld a stork.
What makes you sad, Prince?
He asked. Someone has told the king that I've prophesied that a child shall be born this night in this palace, who will speak all the languages of the world and play every musical instrument. I am no magician to bring these things to come to pass, but he says that if it does not happen, he will have me dragged through the city at a horse's tail until I die.
Do not trouble yourself,
answered the stork.
I will manage to find such a child, for I am the king of all the storks whose life you spared, and now I can repay you for it. The stork flew away and soon returned carrying in his beak a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes and laid it down near a lute. In an instant, the baby stretched out his hands and began to play a tune so beautiful that even the prince forgot his sorrows and listened. Then he was given a flute and a zither, and he was able to draw the music from them, and the prince, whose courage was gradually rising, spoke to him in all the languages that he knew. The baby answered him in all, and no one could have told which was his native tongue. The next morning the king went straight to the prince's room and saw with his own eyes the wonders that the baby could do. "If your magic can produce such a baby," he said, "you must be greater than any wizard who ever lived, and shall have my daughter in marriage." And, being a king, and therefore accustomed to have everything the moment he wanted it, he commanded the ceremony to be performed without delay, and a splendid feast to be made for the bride and bridegroom. When it was over, he said to the prince, "Now that you are really my son, tell me by what arts you were able to fulfill the tasks I set you." "My noble father-in-law," answered the prince, "I am ignorant of all spells and arts, but somehow I have always managed to escape death which has threatened me." And he told the king how he had been forced to run away from his stepfather, and how he had spared the 3 birds, and had joined the 2 soldiers, who had from envy done utmost to ruin him. The king rejoiced in his heart that his daughter had married a prince, and not some common man, and he chased the 2 soldiers away with whips, and told them that if they ever dared to show their faces across the borders of his kingdom, they should die the same death he had prepared for the prince. The stream cut off, with only a page left of the story. It could have waited like 5 more minutes. No, it has to cut off on the last page. Oh. Yeah. Fairs are being a bit tricky today. Don't they know that the Friday Night Fairy Tales is for them? It's amazing how many fairy tales, or things called fairy tales, don't involve fairies at all. So, our second story, which has names which will be fun to say, Tritill, Litill, and the Birds. Once upon a time there lived a princess who was so beautiful and so good that everybody loved her. Her father could hardly bear her out of his sight, and he almost died of grief when one day she disappeared. And though the whole kingdom was searched through and through, she could not be found at any corner of it. In despair, the king ordered a proclamation to be made that whoever could bring her back to the palace should have her for his wife. This made the young men start afresh in their search, but they were no more successful than before, and returned sorrowfully back to their homes. Now there dwelt, not far from the palace, an old man who had 3 sons. The 2 eldest were allowed by their parents to do just as they liked, but the youngest was always obliged to give way to his brothers. When they were all grown up, the eldest told his father that he was tired of leading such a quiet life, and that he meant to go away and see the world. The old people were very unhappy at the thought that they must part with him, but they said nothing and began to collect all that he would want for his travels, and were careful to add a pair of new boots. When everything was ready, he bade them farewell and started merrily away. For some miles his road lay through a wood, and when he left it, he suddenly became out on a bare hillside. When he sat down to rest, and pulling out his wallet prepared to eat his dinner, he had only eaten a few mouthfuls when an old, badly dressed man passed by, and seeing the food, asked if the young man could not spare him a little. "Not I, indeed," answered he. "Why, I have scarcely enough for myself. If you want food, you must earn it." And the beggar went on. After the young man had finished his dinner, he rose and walked on for several hours, till he reached a second hill, where he threw himself down on the grass and took some bread and milk from his wallet. While he was eating and drinking, there came by an old man, yet more wretched than the first, and begged for a few mouthfuls. But instead of food, he only got hard words, and limped sadly away. Towards evening, the young man reached an open space in the wood, and by this time he thought he would like some supper. The birds saw the food, and flew around his head in numbers, hoping for some crumbs, but he threw stones at them and frightened them off. Then he began to wonder where he should sleep. Not in the open space he was in, for that was bare and cold. Though he had walked long that day and was tired, he dragged himself up and went on, seeking for a shelter. At length he saw a deep sort of hole or cave under a great rock, and it seemed quite empty, so he went in and lay down in a corner. About midnight he was awakened by a noise, and peeping out he beheld a terrible ogress approaching. He implored her not to hurt him, but to let him stay there for the rest of the night, to which she consented, on the condition that he should spend the next day in doing any task she might choose to set him. To this young man the willingly agreed, and turned over and went to sleep again. In the morning the ogress bade him sweep the dust out of her cave, and to have it cleaned before her return in the evening, otherwise it would be the worse for him. And then she left the cave. The young man took the spade and began to clean the floor with the cave, but try as he would, the dirt stuck still in place. He soon gave up the task and sat sulkily in the corner, wondering what punishment the ogress would find for him, and why she had set him to do such an impossible task. He had not long to wait after the ogress came home before he knew what his punishment would be. Death by suicide. She gave just one look at the floor of the cave, and then dealt him a blow on the head, which cracked his skull. And there was the end of him. Meanwhile, his next brother grew tired of staying home, and let his parents have no rest until they consented that he should also be given some food and new boots, and go out and see the world. On his road he also met the two beggars, who prayed for little of his bread and milk, but the man had never been taught to help other people, and had made it a rule through his life to keep all he had to himself. So he turned a deaf ear and finished his dinner. By and by he too came to the cave, and was bidden by the ogress to clean the floor, but he was no more successful than his brother, and his fate was the same. Little kids, they just don't get their own story. Anyone would have thought that when the old people had only one son left, they would at least have been kind to him, even if they did not love him. But for some reason they could hardly bear the sight of him, though he tried much harder to make them comfortable than his brothers had ever done. So when he asked their leave to go out into the world, they gave it at once, and seemed quite glad to get rid of him. They felt it was quite generous of them to provide him with a pair of new boots and some milk for his journey. Besides the pleasure of seeing the world, The youth was very anxious to discover what had become of his brothers, and he determined to trace as far as he could that they must have gone and what they had done. He followed the road that led from his father's cottage to the hill, where he sat down to rest, saying to himself, "I'm sure my brothers must have stopped here, and I will do the same." He was hungry as well as tired, and took out some of the food that his parents had given him. He was just going to begin to eat when the old man appeared and asked if he could not spare him a little. The young man at once broke off some of his bread, begging the old man to sit down beside him, treating him as if he were an old friend. At last the stranger rose and said to him, "If you're ever in trouble, call me, and I will help you. My name is Tritill." Then he vanished. The young man could not tell where he had gone. However, he felt now that he had rested long enough, and that he had better be going on his way. At the next hill he met the second old man. To him he also gave food and drink. And when this old man had finished, like the first, "If you ever want help in the smallest thing, call to me. My name is Litill." The young man walked on till he reached the open space in the wood, where he stopped for dinner. In a moment, all the birds in the world seemed flying around his head, and he crumbled some of his bread for them, and watched as they darted down to pick it up. When they had cleared off every crumb, the largest bird, with the gayest plumage, said to him, "If you're in trouble and need any help, my birds, come to me, and we will come." And then he flew away. Towards evening, the young man reached the cave where his brothers had met their deaths, and like them, he thought it would be a good place to sleep. Looking around, he saw some pieces of the dead men's clothes and some of their bones. The sight made him shiver, but he would not move away, and resolved to await the return of the ogress, for such he knew she must be. Very soon she came striding in, and he asked politely if she would give him a night's lodging. She answered as before that he might stay on the condition that he should do any work that she might set him till the morning. So, the bargain being concluded, the young man curled himself in the corner and went to sleep. The dirt lay thicker than ever on the floor of the cave when the young man took the spade to begin his work. He could not clear it any more than his brothers had done, and at last the spade itself struck in the earth so that he could not pull it out again. The youth stared at it in despair. "Hey, Raleigh." The youth stared at it in despair. Then the old beggar's words flashed into his mind, and he cried out, "Tritill, Tritill, come and help me." And Tritill stood beside him and asked what he wanted. The youth told him all his story, and when he had finished, the old man said, "A spade and shovel, do your duty." And they danced till the cave, till, in a short time, there was not a speck of dust left on the floor. As soon as it was quite clean, Tritill went on his way. With a light heart, the young man waited the return of the ogress. When she came in, she looked carefully around, then said to him, "You did not do this quite alone. However, the floor is clean, and I will leave your head on." The following morning, the ogress told the young man that he must take all the feathers out of her pillows and spread them to dry in the sun. But if one feather was missing when she came back at night, his head should pay for it. The young man fetched the pillows and shook out all the feathers, and oh, what quantities of them there were! He was thinking to himself as he spread them out carefully how lucky it was that the sun was so bright and that there was no wind. When suddenly a breeze sprang up, and in a moment the feathers were dancing high in the air. At first, the youth tried to collect them again, but he soon found that there was no use, and he cried in despair, "Tritill, Litill, oh my birds, come and help me!" He was hardly said the words when they were all there, and when the birds had brought all the feathers back again, Tritill and Litill and he put them all back in the feathers, as the ogress had bid him. But one little feather they kept out, and told the young man that if the ogress missed it, he was to thrust it up her nose. And then they all vanished, Tritill, Tritill, and the birds. Directly the ogress came home, she flung herself with all her might on the bed, and the whole cave quivered under her. The pillows were soft and full instead of being empty, which surprised her. But that did not content her. She got up and shook out the pillowcases one by one, and began to count the feathers that were in each. "If one is missing, I shall have your head," she said. And at that the young man drew the feather from his pocket and thrust it up his nose, crying, "If you want your feather, here it is." "You did not sort those feathers alone," answered the ogress calmly. "However, this time I will let that pass." That night the young man slept soundly in his corner, and in the morning the ogress told him that his work that day was to slay one of her great oxen, to cook its heart, and to make drinking cups of its horns before she returned home. "There are 50 oxen," added she, "and you must sketch which of the herd I want killed. If you guess right, tomorrow you shall be free to go where you will, and you shall choose besides 3 things as a reward for your service. But if you slay the wrong ox, your head shall pay for it." Left alone, the young man stood thinking for a little. Then he called, "Tritill, Litill, and all, come and help." In a moment he saw them, far away, driving the biggest ox the youth had ever seen. They then drew near, and Tritill killed it, and Litill took its heart for the young man to cook, and both began to turn the horns into drinking cups. The work went merrily on, and they talked gaily, and the young man told his friends of the payment promised him by the ogress if he had done her bidding. Hey, true. The old men warned him that he must ask her for the chest which stood at the foot of her bed, for whatever lay on top of the bed, and what lay under the side of the cave. The young man thanked them for their counsel, and Tritill and Litill then took leave of him, saying that for the present he would need them no more. Scarcely had they disappeared when the ogress came back and found everything ready, just as she had ordered. Before she sat down to eat the bullock's heart, she turned to the young man and said, "You did not do all that alone, my friend, but nevertheless I will keep my word, and tomorrow you shall go your way." So they went to bed and slept until dawn. Yes, very sublime. When the sun rose, the ogress awoke the young man and called to him to choose any 3 things out of her house. "I choose," answered he, "the chest which stands at the foot of your bed, whatever lies on top of the bed, and whatever is under the side of the cave." "You did not choose those things by yourself, my friend," said the ogress. "But what I have promised, that I will do." And then she gave him his reward. The thing which laid out top of her bed turned out to be the lost princess. The chest which stood at the foot of her bed proved to be gold and precious stones, and what was under the side of the cave he found to be a great ship with oars and sails that went on itself, as well as on land as water. You are the luckiest man that ever was born, said the ogress as she went out of the cave, as usual. With much difficulty, the youth put the heavy chest on his shoulders and carried it on board the ship, the princess walking by his side. Then he took the helm and steered the vessel back to her father's kingdom. The king's joy at receiving back his lost daughter was so great that he almost fainted. But when he recovered himself, he made the young man tell him how everything had happened. "You have found her, and you shall marry her," said the king. And so it was done. And this is the end of the story. Okay, well, we survived the second story without issues. Fairies can be pests, but today is Friday, so we should not speak badly of them, else things could happen. Oh, my closed captioning. It just kills me. Uh-oh. This next one is Nordic. I can tell just by the names in it. And it... I don't know if it's going to have fairies in it either. I guess we'll find out. Our next story for this fabulous Friday night of fairy tales. The Three Robes. Long, long ago, a king and a queen reigned over a large and powerful country. What their names were, nobody knows, but their son was called Sigurd, and their daughter was Aniek. But these young people were famed throughout the whole kingdom for their wisdom and beauty. There was only a year between them, and they loved each other so much they could do nothing apart. When they began to grow up, the king gave them a house of their own to live in, with servants and carriages and everything they could possibly want. For many years they lived happily together, and then the queen fell ill. And they knew she would never get better. Promise me... Oh, no, that's supposed to be her speaking. Promise me two things, she said one day to the king. One, that if you marry again, as indeed you must, you will not choose as your wife a woman from some small state or distant island who knows nothing of the world, and will be taken up with thoughts of her grandeur, but rather seek out a princess of some great kingdom who has been used courts all her life and holds them at her true worth. The other thing I have to ask is that you will never cease to watch over your children, who will soon become your greatest joy. These were the queen's last words, and a few hours later, she was dead. The king was so bowed down with sorrow that he could not attend even to the business of the kingdom, and at last his prime minister had to tell him that the people were complaining that they had nobody to right their wrongs. "You must rouse yourself, sir," went on the minister. and put aside your own sorrows for the sake of your country."
"You do not spare me," answered the king. "But what you say is just, and your counsel is good. I have heard that men say, likewise, that it will be for the good of the kingdom for me to marry again, though my heart will never cease to be with my wife. But it was her wish also, therefore to you I entrust the duty of finding a lady fitted to share my throne. Only see that she comes neither from a small town nor a remote island." So an embassy was prepared, and the minister at its head, to visit the greatest courts in the world, to choose out a suitable princess. But the vessel which carried them had not been gone many days, when a thick fog came on, and the captain could neither see nor the right nor to the left. For a whole month the ship drifted about in darkness, till at length the fog lifted, and they beheld a cliff jutting out just in front. On one side of the cliff lay a sheltered bay in which the vessel was soon anchored, and though they did not know where they were, at any rate they felt sure of fresh fruit and water. The minister left the rest of his followers on board the ship, and taking a small boat, rowed himself to land, in order to look about him and to find out if the island was really deserted as it seemed. He had not gone far when he heard the sound of music, and turning in its direction, he saw a woman of marvelous beauty sitting on a low stool playing a harp, while a girl beside her sang. The minister stopped and greeted the lady politely, and she replied with friendliness, asking why he had been out in such an out-of-the-way place. In answer, he told her of the object of his journey.
"I am in the same state as your master," replied the lady. "I was married to a mighty king who ruled over this land, till Vikings came and slew him and put all the people to death. But I managed to escape and hid myself here with my daughter."
And the daughter listened, and said softly to her mother,
"Are you speaking the truth now?" "Remember your promise," answered the mother angrily, giving her a pinch, which was unseen to the minister.
What is your name, madam?" he asked, much touched at this sad story.
"Brava," she replied, "and my daughter is called Lava."
Then she inquired the name of the minister, and of the king his master. After they talked of many things, the lady showed herself learned in all that a woman should know, and even in much that men only were commonly taught. "What a wife she will make for the king," thought the minister to himself, and before long he had begged the honor of her hand for his master. She declared at first that she was too unworthy to accept the position offered her, and that the minister would soon repent his choice. But this only made him more the eager, and in the end he gained her consent, and prevailed on her to return with him at once to his own country. The minister conducted the mother and daughter back to the ship. The anchor was weighed, and the sails spread, and the fair wind was behind them. Now that the fog had lifted, they could see as they looked back that, except just along the shore, the island was bare and deserted, not fit for men to live on. But about that, nobody cared. They had a quick voyage, and in 6 days they reached the land, and at once set out for the capital, a messenger being sent on first by the minister to inform the king of what had happened. When his majesty's eyes fell on the 2 beautiful women, clad in dresses of gold and silver, he forgot his sorrows and ordered preparations for the wedding to be made without delay. In his joy, he never remembered to inquire in what kind of country the future queen had been found. In fact, his head was so turned by her beauty of the 2 ladies that when the invitations were sent by his orders to all the great people in the kingdom, he did not even remember his two children, who remained shut up in their own house. After the marriage, the king ceased to have any will of his own, and did nothing without consulting his wife. She was present at all his councils, and her opinion was asked before making peace or war. But when a few months had passed, the king began to have doubts as to whether the minister's choice had really been a wise one, and he noticed that his children lived more and more in their palace, and never came near their stepmother. It always happened that if a person's eyes are once opened, they see a great deal more than they ever expected, and it soon struck the king that the members of the court had a way of disappearing one after another without any reason. At first he had not paid much attention to the fact, but merely appointed some fresh person to the vacant place. As, however, man after man vanished without leaving a trace, he began to grow uncomfortable and to wonder if the queen had anything to do with it. Things were in the state when one day his wife said to him that it was time for him to make progress through his kingdom, and that his governors were not cheating him of money that was his due. "And you need not be anxious about going," she said, "for I will rule this country while you are away as carefully as you could yourself." The king had no great desire to undertake this journey, but the queen's will was stronger than his, and he was too lazy to make a fight for it. So he said nothing and set about his preparations, ordering his finest ship to be made ready to carry him around the coast. Still, his heart was heavy, and he felt uneasy, though he could not have told why. And the night before he was to start, he went to the children's palace to take leave of his son and daughter. He had not seen them for some time, and they gave him warm welcome, for they loved him dearly, and he had always been kind to them. They had much to tell him, but after a while he checked their merry talk and said, "If I should never come back from this journey, I fear that it may be unsafe for you to stay here. So directly there are no more hopes of my return, go instantly and take the eastwards until you reach a high mountain, which you must cross. Once over the mountain, keep along by the side of a little bay till you come to two trees, one green and the other red, standing in a thicket, and so far back from the road that without looking for them, you would never see them. Hide each in the trunk of one of the trees, and there you will be safe from all your enemies." With these words, the king bade them farewell and entered sadly into his ship. For a few days the wind was fair, and everything seemed going smoothly. Then suddenly a gale sprang up, and a fearful storm of thunder and lightning, such as never happened within the memory of the man. In spite of the efforts of the frightened sailors, the vessel was driven onto the rocks, and not a man on board was saved. That very night, Prince Sigurd had a dream in which he thought his father appeared to him in dripping clothes, and taking the crown from his head, laid it at his son's feet, leaving the room as silently as he had entered it. Hastily the prince awoke his sister Lynette, and they agreed to their father must be dead, and that they must lose no time in obeying his orders and putting themselves in safety. So they collected their jewels and a few clothes, and left the house without being observed by anyone. They hurried on till they arrived at the mountain without once looking back. Then Sigurd glanced round and saw that their stepmother was following them, with an expression on her face which made her uglier than the ugliest old witch. Between her and them lay a thick wood, and Sigurd stopped for a moment to set it on fire. Then he and his sister hastened on more swiftly than before, till they reached the grove with the green and red trees, into which they jumped, and felt at last that they were safe. Now, At that time there reigned over Greece a king who was very rich and powerful, although his name has also been forgotten. He had 2 children, a son and a daughter, who were more beautiful and accomplished than any Greeks had been before, and they were the pride of their father's heart. The prince had no sooner grown out of boyhood than he prevailed on his father to make war during the summer months on a neighboring nation, as to give him a chance of making himself famous. In winter, however, when it was difficult to get food and horses in that wild country, the army was dispersed, and the prince returned home. During one of these wars he had heard reports of the Princess Lineik's beauty, and resolved to seek her out and to ask her hand in marriage. All this Blavia, the queen, found out by means of her black arts, and when the prince drew near the capital she put a splendid dress upon her own daughter, and then went to meet her guest. She bade him welcome to her palace, and when they had finished supper she told him of the loss of her husband, and how there was no one left to govern the kingdom but herself. "But where is the Princess Lineik?" asked the prince, when she had ended her tale. "Here," answered the queen, bringing forward the girl whom she had hitherto kept in the background. The prince looked at her, and was rather disappointed. The maiden was pretty enough, but not much out of the common. "Oh, you must not wonder her pale face and heavy eyes," said the queen hastily, for she saw what was passing in his mind. "She has never got over the loss of both father and mother." "That shows a good heart," thought the prince, "and when she is happy her beauty will soon come back." And without any further delay he begged the queen to consent to the betrothal, for the marriage must take place in his own country. The queen was enchanted. She had hardly expected to succeed so soon, and she set at once to make her preparations. Indeed, she wished to travel with the young couple, to make sure nothing should go wrong. But here the prince was firm that he would take no one with him but Laura, whom he thought was Lineik. They soon took their leave of the queen and set sail in a splendid ship, but in a short time a dense fog came in, and in the dark the captain steered out of his course, and they found themselves in a bay which was quite strange to all the crew. The prince ordered a boat to be lowered, and went on shore to look about him. And it was not long before he noticed the 2 beautiful trees, quite different from any that grew in Greece. Calling out to the sailors, he bade cut them down and carry them on board the ship. This was done, and as the sky was now clear, they put out to sea, and arrived in Greece without any more adventures. The news that the prince had brought home a bride had gone before them, and they were greeted with flowery arches and crowns of colored lights. The king and queen met them on the steps of the palace, and conducted the girl into the woman's house, where she would have to remain until her marriage. The prince then went to his own rooms and ordered the trees should be brought into him. The next morning the prince bade his attendants to bring his future bride to his own apartments, and when she came he gave her such silk which she was to weave into 3 robes, 1 green, 1 red, and 1 blue. All these must be ready before the wedding. The blue one was to be done first, and the green last, and this was to be the most splendid of all, "For I will wear it in our marriage," he said. Left alone, Laura sat and stared at the heap of shining silk before her. She did not know how to weave, and burst into tears as she thought that everything would be discovered. For Lineik's skill in weaving was as famous as her beauty. And she sat down with her face hidden and her body shaken by sobs. Sigurd in the tree heard this and was moved to pity. "Lynette, my sister," he called. "Laufar is weeping. Help her, I pray you." "You have forgotten the wrongs her mother did to us," answered Lynette, "and that is owing to her that we are banished from home." But she was not really unforgiving, and very soon she slid quietly out of her hiding place, and taking the silk from Laufer's hands, began to weave it. So quick and clever was she that the blue dress was not only woven, but embroidered, and Lynette was safe back in her tree before the prince returned. "This is the most beautiful work I have ever seen," he said, taking up the bit, "and I am sure that the red one will be still better, because the stuff is richer." And with a low bow, he left the room. Laufer had hoped secretly that when the prince had seen the blue dress finished, he would have let her off the other two. But when she found she was expected to fulfill the whole task, her heart sank and she began to cry loudly. Again Sigurd heard her and begged Lynette to come and help her. And Lynette, feeling sorry for her distress, wove and embroidered the second dress as she had done the first, mixing gold thread and precious stones until you could hardly see the red on the stuff. When it was done, she glided into her tree, just as the prince came in. "You're as quick as you're clever," he said admiringly. "This looks as if it had been embroidered by the fairies. But the green robe must outshine the other two. I will give you 3 days in which to finish it. After it is ready, we will be married at once." Now, as he spoke, there rose up in Laufer's mind all the unkind things that her mother and she had done to Lynette. She could hope that they would be forgiven and that Lynette would come and rescue her for a third time. And perhaps Lynette, who had not forgotten the past either, might have left her alone to get the best she could. Not only Sigurd, her brother, implored her to help just once more. So Lynette slid out of her tree and, to Laufer's great relief, set herself to work. When the shining green silk was ready, she caught the sun's rays and the moon's beams in the point of her needle and wove them into a pattern such as no man had ever seen. But it took a long time, and on the third morning, just as she was putting the last stitches into the flower, the prince came in. Lynette jumped up quickly and tried to get past him to her tree, but the folds of silk were wrapped around her, and she would have fallen had not the prince caught her. "I've thought for some time that it was not all quite straight here," he said. "Tell me who you are and where you came from." Lynette then told her name and her story, and when she ended, the prince turned angrily to Laufer and declared that, as punishment for her wicked lies, she deserved to die a shameful death. But Laufer fell at his feet and begged for mercy. "It was her mother's fault," she said. "It was she, not I, who passed off as Princess Lynette. The only lie I ever told you was about the robes. I do not deserve death for that." She was still on her knees when Prince Sigurd entered the room. He prayed the Prince of Greece to forgive Laufer, which he did, on the condition that Lynette would consent to marry him. "Not till my stepmother is dead," she answered, "for she has brought misery to all that came near her." Then Laufer told him that Laufer was not only the wife of a king, but an ogress who had stolen her from a neighboring palace and had brought her up as her daughter. And besides being an ogress, she was also a witch, and by her black arts had sunk the ship which the father of Sigurd and Lynette had set sail. It was she who had caused the disappearance of the courtiers, for which no one could account, by eating them at night. She hoped to get rid of all the people in the country, then to fill the land with ogres and ogresses like herself. So Prince Sigurd and the Prince of Greece collected his army swiftly and marched upon the town where Blavor held her palace. They came so suddenly that no one knew of it, and if they had, Lava would have eaten most of the strong men, and others, fearful of something they could not tell about, had secretly left the place. Therefore, she was easily captured, and the next day was beheaded in the marketplace. After the two princes marched back to Greece, Leniak was no longer any reason for putting off her wedding, and married the Prince of Greece at the same time that Sigurd married the princess. And Lafa remained with Leniak as her friend and sister, till they found a husband for her and a great nobleman, and all three couples lived happily until they died. Insert applause. Oh. Shape-shifting ogresses and their magic. Okay, the next story is 6 pages long, and I don't think I can do that in 10 minutes. So instead, we're going to take a break. Sound good? It's okay? I will be back in a few minutes. Then we'll continue these wonderful stories.
Welcome back. So what did you think of that last story? I always wonder what the Nordic countries always seem to relate back to Greece for something. I mean, it seems strange. And typically, a Nordic country will have a story involving ogres. And ogres are typically magical. But Greece, the prince in Greece, actually mentioned fairies. So, does it make you wonder where the fairies actually live? Because this one actually had a fairy, well, mentioned fairies, but didn't say anything about the fairies being there. But if you look at the Hans Christian Andersen stories, fairies tend to live in warmer climates. Because even then, like Thumbelina, when she was rescued by the sparrow, she was flown to Greece and met the fairies there. And this one, when Princess Litill was brought to Greece, they assumed that fairies had done the work to make the dresses. But fairies in those stories are often typically nice, whereas fairies in the more Western European countries, France has also got lots of fairy tales, and England, of course, the fairies aren't quite as nice, but it's not just fairies, it's fair folk. Especially in the Great Britain area. And then there's like different classes of fairies, and technically, fairies and if you go by one of the books I have on my wish list that I've kind of done research on, in the Celtic regions, fairies were angels that revolted, but they weren't bad enough to get banished. So they're mid-range angels, I guess. So you have the nice holy angels, then you have the demons, which were fallen angels, and you have the fairies in between, which makes sense. It would also explain their abilities, how they can either help or hinder people. They tend to look out for small children and good people who are down on their luck, and they tend to punish wicked people. So fairies, or the fairfolk, are the in-betweens. Just stuff to think about. And this is, Friday night we talk about fairies and fairy tales. So I just thought I'd impart that knowledge on you. But if you look at my throne lists, not advertising it or anything, But on my thrown list, there is one that is a translation from Gaelic to English that talks about people who have raided Scotland and Ireland, mostly Ireland, and talking about what they found when they got there. And the fairies were there before the Vikings. So, yeah. Anyway, should I try to read one more story or two more stories? The next two stories are both only 6 pages long, so I should be able to do them maybe half an hour each, if not pushing it. So, lurkers, what do you say? Should I do one more story, or should I do two? One story, or two? Two stories, or one? I'm going to read at least one more story. I would like to read two, but it's already close to the time where I'd normally end, but I want to make up for all the time that was screwed up by Twitch messing up. So, ending within the sound of my wonderful, melodious voice. One more story, or two. I wait with somewhat bated breath on your answer. Somewhat dated Brent. What? Oh. Voice recognition software is not as good as it should be. Or, I guess I could end in my normal time and not read the two more stories. But I'm leaving that up to you. As my wonderful audience, I want to do what you want me to do. So, I may just stare blankly at the screen for a while. I don't know how to put a timer on things. Oh, that's not it. What is that? Not goals. Cool. Yeah, and cool. Okay. Alright, chat. You have 3 minutes. A poll has started. La 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 la
wow, really? So la is la 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 la. Comes up as mowing the yard. Okay. Lot. La 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 la. La 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 la. La. La 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 la. 1 minute's gone. If there are no answers, option 3 will be chosen. Actually, I guess if I turned off the viewer count, so I don't know how many of you are here. Turn off of 2 pounds in the coming year. I hope my narrations come across clearer than those. The closed captions are just... I don't know what the hell they're doing. The poll has ended. And the results are... none of the above. Okay then, well, guess it gives my answer. Thank you all for coming in tonight. I do appreciate everyone who comes in, and I do hope you all enjoy the fairy tales. I will have my normal reading stream next Thursday to see if we can get more of Rivals of Sherlock Holmes taken care of. And next Friday will, of course, be more Friday Night Fairy Tales. The Sunday after that will be my streaming anniversary. So if anyone cares to stop by, I'll probably start a little earlier. As long as I shut off my phone so no one can interrupt. We'll hopefully see you all then. Good night.